They said I wasn't one of them. And they said it with their eyes, long before they ever spoke the words. Not loud, not obvious, not in front of crowds, but whispered in corners, shared in glances, exchanged behind the safety of locked screens and locked hearts. I was different, and in their world, different meant wrong. Do you know what it feels like to walk into a room and feel like the air thickens against your skin? Like the silence becomes louder the moment you step in? As if every smile was stretched over a question mark, and every greeting carried a shadow of doubt. That's where it began. Not with a slap, not with an insult, but with subtle exclusions, with being the last one chosen, or not being chosen at all. With being told I should try something else, dress differently, speak more softly, or just know my place. And maybe for a while I tried to do just that. I tried to blend in, to speak like them, think like them, walk like them. I tried to erase myself to earn their nods. But the more I erased, the more invisible I became. Not just to them, but to myself. It wasn't one big betrayal that broke me.
No.
It was the tiny daily confirmations that I didn't belong. It was the way they said us, and I always knew I was part of the them. It was how every time I shone, they squinted. Every time I grew, they shrunk away. But here's the truth they never saw coming. The seed of rejection they planted didn't die. It rooted. It grew in silence. And while they built walls to keep me out, I built wings to rise above. There was a moment, a night, actually, when I stood alone under a sky that looked like it had been stitched with stars just for me. I asked myself, what if they're right? What if I'm really not like them? And then a thought followed that changed everything. What if I'm not supposed to be? What if belonging isn't about being accepted by them, but about accepting who I really am? And just like that, something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to be included and started learning how to stand alone. I stopped knocking on doors that were never meant to open and started carving a path where no door was needed. A path that didn't need validation. Only vision. I won't lie to you, it hurt. It still does sometimes. To be the outsider. To be the one no one claps for until the spotlight's already on you. To be watched, not with support, but with skepticism. But the most beautiful victories are the quiet ones. The ones born in rooms where no one's watching. The ones that come not to prove something to others, but to prove something to yourself.
And soon that time came.
The same people who once dismissed me now paused when I entered. Their laughter turned into silence, their doubt into curiosity. They asked, "How did you do it?" pretending they hadn't tried to make me disappear. But I remembered. Every glance. Every unspoken rejection. Every door slammed in my face. And I smiled, not out of spite but out of strength. Because I had finally become what they said I couldn't be. They said I was not one of them. But I never needed to be. I just needed to be me. And that was more than enough to prove them wrong. Her name was Aria. Not loud. Not flashy. Just quiet strength wrapped in calm silence. The kind of silence people mistake for weakness, until that silence speaks and everyone listens. She didn't grow up in privilege. No golden spoons. No grand applause. Born into a small town where everyone knew everyone and everything, including what you were supposed to be. And more importantly, what you could never become. Aria was the kind of girl who sat at the back of the class, not because she wasn't smart, but because she didn't want to be seen. Not yet. Her notebooks were full, not of school lessons, but of dreams. Sketches. Words. Thoughts that couldn't be spoken out loud, not in a place where being different was dangerous. Her father was a factory worker. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Money was tight. Expectations were tighter. You need to be realistic, they said. Don't dream too big, they warned. People like us don't go that far. But Aria didn't believe that. Not fully. Somewhere deep inside, she carried something no one could take from her. Hope. And hope, when watered with just enough pain, becomes a force stronger than fear. As a child, she was labeled too sensitive. As a teen, too ambitious. As a woman, too much. Too much for those who were too small to hold her light. She learned early that silence was safer. That being agreeable made others comfortable. That not speaking up helped her survive in a world that didn't want her to be more than expected. But survival is not living. And deep inside her, Aria wanted more. At school, she wasn't the top of the class, but she was the one with questions no one else thought to ask. At home, she wasn't the loudest, but she was the one who noticed what everyone else ignored. In life, she wasn't fast, but she was steady. And sometimes, steady wins the race. There was a teacher, Mrs. Rahila, one of the few who saw her. Not just her grades or her shyness, but her potential. "You don't have to fit in, Aria," she once said. "You just have to keep growing. And trust me, growth always finds the light, even in the darkest soil." That sentence stuck with her. It became a whisper in her mind every time the world screamed, "You can't." Her friendships were complicated. She wasn't in the popular crowd. She wasn't the rebel either. She was somewhere in between, too weird for the cool kids, too focused for the wild ones. A no-man's land of her own. She tried to blend in, laughed at jokes that stung, lowered her hand when she knew the answer, just to avoid the sighs, said okay when she wanted to scream no. And slowly, people began to decide who she was. The quiet girl, the background girl, the one who wouldn't go far. And yet, while the world made its assumptions, Aria made her plans. Late nights weren't for parties. They were for reading, learning, building. Weekends weren't for fitting in. They were for figuring out. She didn't rebel with noise. She rebelled with preparation. What they didn't see was the fire she carried. What they didn't know was how she journaled every rejection, recorded every underestimation. Not to hurt, but to remember. To use it later. To fuel the very journey they said she couldn't take. Then came college. A place where she hoped the world might be different. And in some ways it was. But people don't change just because you change scenery. The same patterns followed her, people seeing only what they wanted to, dismissing her, overlooking her, smiling with condescension. "You're not really leadership material. You do better behind the scenes. You're not one of us." And each time, those words hit her like sharp ice, cold, but eventually melting into quiet resolve. Because here's what they never knew. Every time they counted her out, she added herself back in. Aria didn't become strong overnight. She became strong over years. Through tears shed behind locked bathroom doors. Through journal entries written with trembling hands. Through whispers to the night sky when no one else would listen. She didn't scream.
She didn't shout.
She just kept moving forward.
Slowly, patiently,
powerfully. There was a moment, her final year of university, when a major opportunity came up. A national leadership summit. Highly competitive. Only a handful chosen. Everyone expected the usual names to make the cut. No one even asked if Aria had applied. She had. And she got in. The announcement shook everyone. People whispered. Some celebrated. Most were stunned. That Aria? She got selected? But she's so quiet. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in her, but around her. Because she already knew who she was. But now, they were starting to learn too. But proving them wrong once doesn't mean the world suddenly accepts you. Aria had stepped into the spotlight once. Unexpectedly, undeniably, but that spotlight was not without its shadows. Because when you rise after being overlooked for so long, not everyone claps. Some squint. Some scoff. And some start sharpening their daggers in silence. At the leadership summit, Aria walked in wearing confidence like borrowed clothing, still unsure if it truly belonged to her. The room was filled with polished voices and practiced smiles. People who had been trained, groomed, selected. People who knew how to be seen and, more importantly, how to be heard. She noticed it immediately, the glances, the tone when she introduced herself. Polite but patronizing. One of the organizers, a man named Imran, looked at her name badge and said, "Oh, you're from that college?" She nodded. He smiled faintly. Interesting. That word, interesting, hung in the air like a veil, hiding what he really meant. What are you doing here? She wasn't supposed to speak at the first group session. But as fate, or perhaps divine justice, would have it, someone dropped out last minute. Arya was the only one left from the backup list. They gave her 10 minutes to prepare. 10 minutes to face a room full of power, privilege, and preconceptions. And when she stood up to speak, something happened. She stopped thinking about what she lacked. She stopped thinking about what they thought. She simply spoke from the heart. Her voice trembled in the beginning, but she didn't stop, because her truth was stronger than her fear. She spoke of being overlooked, of being told, "You're not one of us," of working in the shadows while others basked in light they didn't earn. She ended with a line that pierced the silence. "You don't have to look like them to lead like them. And sometimes, not being one of them is exactly what makes you powerful." There was silence. Then applause. Real applause. But not everyone clapped. Imran didn't. And he wasn't the only one. Because when your light begins to shine, some people feel threatened, especially those who've always defined their worth by standing taller than others. After the speech, opportunities started knocking. Invitations. Interviews. Panels. The same people who once ignored her now called her refreshing and authentic. But behind the praise, there was pushback. Imran, now part of the organizing committee, subtly began excluding her from inner conversations. She noticed how her emails got lost, how decisions were made without her input, how her ideas were great, but maybe not the right fit right now. She wasn't naive.
She saw what was happening.
But she refused to shrink. Then came the biggest challenge yet. She was nominated to lead a major youth initiative that would influence national education policy. It was groundbreaking, bold, and Arya was the top contender. But as the final selection approached, the sabotage began. Someone leaked false information claiming she'd misrepresented her academic background. Anonymous messages flooded the committee's inbox. Old social media posts were dug up and twisted.
And Imran?
He said nothing. Silence. Again. But this time not hers. This time, silence was used as a weapon. The board called her in for a clarification meeting. She sat in that room, facing a panel of decision-makers, most of whom barely knew her story, but all of whom had now heard whispers. She was given a chance to explain. And she did. Not with defense, but with evidence, with grace, with fire. She brought transcripts, letters, records. And more than that, she brought truth. A calm, fierce truth. When one board member asked, "Why do you think someone would try to discredit you like this?" she answered, "Because some people don't like it when someone they overlooked becomes someone they can't ignore." That line didn't just land. It echoed. She walked out not knowing if she'd still get the role. But she knew one thing. She hadn't lost herself. That night was hard.
She cried.
Not because she was weak, but because holding in strength for so long without release breaks even the strongest souls. She remembered her mother's voice on the phone earlier. "Beta, the higher you rise, the stronger the wind. Don't let it knock you over." And she didn't. 2 days later, the results were announced. She got the role. But the real victory wasn't the title. It was the realization that she had become exactly who they said she couldn't be, without changing who she truly was. But it wasn't over yet. Public reaction was a mix. Some celebrated, others criticized. An article surfaced titled, "The Rise of the Quiet Reformer, Real or Just a Trend?"
It stung.
Because even after all this, some still couldn't accept her for what she was. But Arya had learned something powerful. You don't need universal acceptance to walk in your purpose. You just need enough belief to take the next step. She faced more conflicts, more subtle dismissals. But now, she had armor, self-trust. And that armor didn't glitter. It wasn't loud, but it was unbreakable. A year later, she stood at the United Nations, speaking not just for herself, but for every girl who was ever told, "You're not one of us." And she smiled, because they were right. She wasn't. She was more. And that truth was unstoppable. The night before the final decision, Arya couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment that had led her here. The moments of doubt, the moments of victory, and the quiet, whispered criticisms that followed each step. What if they still didn't believe in her? What if the rumors had poisoned their minds beyond repair? But as the darkness of the night stretched on, something within her stirred. A feeling she hadn't fully understood until now, a quiet, undeniable truth. She was not fighting for approval anymore. She was fighting for the truth. The next day, the board members filed in, all wearing polite smiles and empty eyes, as if nothing had happened. But Arya knew better. She could feel the weight of the room, the tension thick enough to suffocate. They had called her in one last time, to make a decision. This was it. The final moment. Arya stood at the front of the room, surrounded by the very people who had doubted her, challenged her, and even tried to tear her down. But now it was her turn. And she wasn't backing down. Imran, sitting at the head of the table, glanced at her with that same smug expression he had worn since the first time they met. The one that said, "You don't belong here." He cleared his throat. "Arya, we've reviewed everything. We understand your commitment and your qualifications. But there's still a certain concern." Arya felt the familiar tightening of her chest, but she refused to show fear. She stood taller, her voice steady. "I've faced worse than this, Imran. And I'm not backing down." The board exchanged glances, some uncertain, others resigned. Imran spoke again. "It's not about your qualifications, Arya. It's about the way you've handled things. The way you've handled this situation. Some people are wondering if you're ready for the responsibility." Arya paused, her mind racing. She wanted to shout, "I am ready. I've always been ready." But instead, she chose silence. She knew this moment wasn't about just defending herself. It was about showing them she was more than they could ever understand. "So, you're questioning my readiness?" she asked, her voice calm but powerful. "Because I dared to stand up for myself? Because I refused to let your doubts define me?" She let the words sink in. The silence in the room thickened. Imran shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It's not just that, Arya. It's the way you've handled the attention. People are talking. They're saying maybe you're too ambitious." Arya's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her composure. "I'm not here to be liked, Imran. I'm here to make a difference. Ambition isn't a crime. It's the fire that drives people to change things. To prove that the impossible is possible. And if that makes me too ambitious, then I wear it as a badge of honor." For the first time, she saw something in Imran's eyes that she hadn't seen before. It wasn't disdain. It was fear. Fear of someone like her, someone who refused to play the game the way they wanted her to. She didn't need to prove her worth to him anymore. She had already done that, through her actions, through her persistence, through every moment where she stood tall when they expected her to fall. The room shifted. The board members who had once questioned her now shifted in their seats, exchanging looks, their expressions betraying uncertainty. Then, one by one, they began to speak up, not against her, but in her favor. "Arya's right," said one board member, her voice shaky but determined. "She's earned this. She's proven that she has the strength, the intelligence, and the heart to lead. I've seen it firsthand." "I agree," another voice chimed in. "I've watched her grow. She's not just capable, she's necessary. The world needs voices like hers." Imran didn't speak again. His face, once filled with certainty, now carried the weight of a man who had underestimated someone far more powerful than he could comprehend. Finally, the chairperson of the board, an older woman with sharp eyes and a quiet authority, addressed Arya. "We've made our decision." Arya held her breath, every nerve on edge. "You're a new leader, Arya." The words hit her like a wave. She blinked, almost not believing what she had just heard. But it was true. The validation she had been seeking, not from them, but from herself, was finally hers. The applause that followed was louder than any she had heard before. But it wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the recognition of her own power, of the truth she had fought so hard to protect. Imran, sitting at the head of the table, did not clap.
He didn't need to.
His silence spoke louder than anything else. Later that day, As she walked out of the building, the weight on her shoulders felt different. Lighter, somehow. She had finally proven something to herself. She wasn't just capable. She was destined. But there was still one thing left to do. That night, she stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same one who had been told she wasn't enough. She wasn't the same woman who had questioned her own worth.
No.
This woman was unshakable, strong,
Fierce.
and she was just getting started. As Arya walked out of the building, the weight that had once burdened her shoulders began to feel lighter. The air outside seemed fresher, the sky clearer, as if the universe itself was acknowledging her victory. But the real victory wasn't the title she had earned. It was the journey that had shaped her, the battles she had fought, and the strength she had found within herself. The applause she received earlier was nothing compared to the internal applause that echoed through her heart. It wasn't validation from others she had craved. It was a quiet certainty that she had always been enough. That the doubts, the whispers, the moments of uncertainty, they had all been a part of her growth. Now, she stood at the threshold of a new chapter, not defined by what others thought of her, but by what she had proven to herself. She had shown them that she was not just capable, but unstoppable. She had broken through barriers, shattered expectations, and, in doing so, proved something even greater. You cannot be held back by the limitations others place on you. As she walked away from the building, the city felt different, like a place of infinite possibilities. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be new challenges, new people who would try to doubt her. But now, she understood something crucial. The opinions of others could only affect her if she allowed them to. And she wasn't going to allow that anymore. So, to you, the one reading this now, what will you do when the world tells you that you're not enough? Will you shrink back and accept their limitations, or will you rise, proving them wrong in ways they never saw coming? The world is waiting for you to show up as your true self. Your dreams, your power, your potential, they are all within you, just waiting to be unleashed. The question is, will you stand up and claim it? Will you walk boldly into the future, just as Arya did, and show the world what you are truly made of?